Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. I'm really excited to be talking about this topic. It's one that's very important to me. And I'm really excited to share this information with everybody. So as we get into this, I should probably introduce myself. So my name is Amy DeBray. For those that don't know me, I'm a coach, I'm a teacher, an educator. I do some writing, some consulting, and obviously some public speaking. I have a master's degree in coaching from the University of Victoria, and it was actually during that time that I researched and created the website athletetransitions.ca, and that's where a lot of this information comes from. And that whole website, it's a resource for athletes. It's a resource for people working with athletes. And it's all information and tools to help athletes prepare for and navigate retirement, which is exactly what I'm going to talk about today. Before I dive into the topic, though, I do want to do a land acknowledgement. I am an uninvited guest on this land. I am incredibly grateful to live, work, learn, and play on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Coast Salish people. These are just a couple photos from my area. I am so grateful to enjoy this land, and I will likely this afternoon be down at the beach enjoying it a little bit more. So as I get started, I do want to do a couple definitions just so we're all clear on what I'm talking about. So when we're talking about transition, I am specifically talking about the transition at the end of one's career. Most athletes will go through numerous transitions as they move from the youth level to the competitive to the high performance, as they change teams, as they go into being professionals, whatever their career is, a collegiate. All of those are transitions, and all of those transitions have their unique challenges. But I'm specifically looking at the transition at the end of their career. So when they're moving out of that playing career into retirement, or when they're taking a step back and they're no longer at their top level. And it's important to note that the end of the competitive career, whatever that may look like, it can be the result of injury, it can be the result of age restrictions, loss of contract, personal choice. And personal choice is a bit of a tricky one because often personal choice is determined due to other things. If we're talking about a professional athlete, they may realize that they're no longer able to keep up. They may not be able to compete at what was their highest level. Their body may not be able to sustain what they were doing. And so it's a personal choice-ish. Some of that choice has been removed. So that is the specific transition I'm talking about. It's that move into retirement. The other term I want to define is athletic identity. When an athlete has developed an athletic identity, it's one of the biggest predictors of challenge in retirement. So an athletic identity is when one's athletic career or skills become the dominant part of their identity, which results in them neglecting other roles that typically make up one's identity. So for someone who is not a professional athlete or a high-level athlete, they may define themselves in numerous ways by their hobbies, by their career, and all of those things. They have multifaceted personalities or identities. It's very common for athletes to develop an identity that is specific to their sport. So if you were to ask them what they were or who they are, they're going to tell you, I'm a hockey player, I'm a basketball player, I'm a soccer player, I'm a runner. And that's going to be the primary lens through which they see themselves and that others see them. And often if you were to dive in and ask them deeper questions, they're still going to keep coming back with, I'm an athlete, and they won't actually be able to tell you other parts of their identity. So when this athletic identity forms, it makes it really challenging as they go into retirement because they're losing that primary part of themselves. So a little quote from an article I wrote, it says, many athletes live lives with deeply entrenched routines. A large part of their identity comes from their athletic role. We refer to this as an athletic identity. Because they've dedicated much of their life to achieve their athletic goals, other parts of their identity may be less developed. An exclusive athletic identity was when this has gone to a whole new level, can make retirement or the ending of an athletic career really challenging because it is that sole lens. So I'm first going to dive into factors that contribute to an athletic identity, because I think we need to understand where this is coming from. And once we understand where it's coming from, we can actually then start to maybe interrupt that process. When I created my website, a lot of the work I did is what would be considered downstream work. It's we recognize that there's a problem and we're trying to meet them after the problem has occurred. In a perfect world, we're going to meet them before the problem occurs, and we're going to try and prevent that athletic identity from forming. So in order to prevent athletic identity from forming, we need to understand what factors contribute to it. One of the biggest factors is early sports specialization. And I'm just going to read the actual definition, like the research-based definition of early sports specialization. So it's very clear. So research says early sports specialization refers to an athlete focusing on one main sport early to middle childhood. So in those early years of childhood, allowing for little to no engagement in other sports or activities. Early sports specialization is further defined as an athlete spending more than 8 months in one single sport, or spending more hours in 1 week practicing that sport or activity than is equal to their age. So for example, a 6-year-old spending more than 6 hours at one sport, or an athlete spending more than 8 months out of a year playing a sport. I come from hockey. This is incredibly common. We're seeing younger and younger kids specializing or choosing to specialize in one single sport. And I anticipate we're going to see a lot of kids with challenges as they come out of those careers. It is important to note that early sport specialization in some sports is unavoidable, in that they are early specialization sports. So for example, gymnastics and figure skating are both early specialization sports, meaning that the athletes are competing at the highest level at younger ages. So if you were to look at the Olympics, those athletes in gymnastics and figure skating are younger. And so what's happening is they're dedicating a large amount of their childhood to that sport. There's a lot of research looking at those sports and looking at the challenges for those athletes, because their careers they're ending at times in their teenage years, and they have no clue who they are beyond that sport. And so it's really challenging. And really the detriment of early sports specialization is that lack of access to other sports or hobbies that help an athlete expand who they are. And if we look at the research, we know that engaging in other things, other sports, actually helps improve performance. All of the research says that being a multi-sport athlete is actually more beneficial. But with the fact that sport has started to become very much a business, that seems to be going away, and we are seeing kids specialize even earlier. So trying to avoid that is key. Other factors are really restrictive schedules. This is why when you look at university students or university athletes and professional athletes, for a lot of them, their athletic identity will set in there, because the schedules are so limited in what they can do. Everything they do is focused on competing in that sport, and their whole life is scheduled around that. Further, if the team culture is very restrictive in that it allows little space for the athletes to do anything else, that also is a factor. We're also seeing this restrictive schedule trickle down into the high school level with the growth of academies. These kids are now, rather than fitting their sport around their school, their school is fit in around their sport. And so they get up and their whole day is built around training for their sport, which again is going to narrow that focus for them and really forces them into that singular identity of being an athlete. Another big factor is public identity, and we're seeing this really come about with professional athletes and the rise of social media. If we look at professional athletes, we're seeing an objectification of athletes. They are being made out to be objects. I'm thinking right now the Johnny Gaudreau situation in hockey, and him just being called out for being ungrateful for making a decision that didn't make sense to other people. And it's really, it's failure to see him as a person first. And so this public identity is actually detrimental to athletes. Last year, we had Dr. Tanisha Singleton talking about fan experience, and we talked about, I think it was Giannis, live streaming a phone call to his brother after winning the championship, and all of the fans being a part of that. And what that does is that again further solidifies that idea of Giannis as an athlete, and kind of removes those other aspects or those other layers of who he is as a person. And so it really narrows that identity. So it becomes really important for organizations to help almost protect the athletes and remind them that they are humans first, and help kind of limit that objectification that can occur. The bottom factors there, they all kind of relate to the same thing. So socioeconomics, race, and family dynamics, they all play similar roles. And they kind of look at, if an athlete feels like their only way to success is through sport, then this is also going to narrow that focus. Further, if an athlete feels like financial pressure to perform well, or if they have limited access, then that, or limited options, and everything is kind of being poured into this one sport, then that athletic identity can increase. Further, for marginalized groups, if they see limited options in terms of being successful in life, due to like systematic racism and all of those systems that keep them marginalized, and sport is a way out, then athletic identity can increase. There's a lot of research out of the US looking at Black basketball and football collegiate athletes and how their athletic identity set in quite early, as that was what they saw as their really only option to success. Further, family dynamics can play a role, especially if there's family pressure to perform. And that can kind of come back to the socioeconomic as well, is like if the family is putting a lot of money into sport, and we're seeing that youth sport costs more, then that can also be a factor. And then also, like if they are coming from a household that is problematic, then, or if they're trying to escape things at home, then that can also lead to that athletic identity narrowing. So that then brings me to what can we actually do to help? So we know that these things contribute to athletic identity. So what can we do to help? How we coach matters. One of my big focuses right now is looking at coaching strategies and organizational strategies, and how do we make that shift so that we're promoting athlete wellness as well as performance. And there are things that we can do that can help ease athletic identity in the way that we coach. So cross-training is actually a great way to help expose athletes to other activities. So if coaches can incorporate other sports into team building, into training, into just like team activities, this is going to expose the athletes to things outside of their sport, and it's going to help them kind of gain interest into things that they may not have previously had an opportunity to experience. So for example, if a hockey team can take a day and go play baseball, go play basketball, rent a gym, just go do other things, allowing space for athletes to actually get exposed to other activities is going to be really beneficial. And the other is like looking at different training options. CrossFit is one of the things that the research shows has been really beneficial in athletes in their transition. Is like many athletes crave competition when they leave their sport. So CrossFit is an opportunity. It's team-based at times. It allows for competition. It has a social aspect, and it's an opportunity to continue up physical activity. So in that cross training, finding different training methods to introduce athletes to, so that when they come out of their career, they actually have things that they're interested in, and they can kind of intrinsically motivate themselves to continue to be physically fit. Much like the restrictive schedule can narrow focus, allowing athletes autonomy in their schedule can help expand that identity. So creating spaces for athletes to be flexible in their training schedule, allowing them to kind of schedule their own day where possible. Not only is this going to help them build in time to explore things, other interests they may have, it's also going to give them the life skill necessary to schedule life after. Because athletes live such rigid lives, rigid, tight schedules, often when they go into retirement, they feel lost in the sense of not knowing how to schedule their own lives. From early on, someone's been telling them where to be, when to be there, and what to do while they're there. And so they don't necessarily learn how to schedule their own life. So allowing for autonomy and allowing for them that little bit of flexibility in their training schedule is beneficial. Education is always beneficial. And in this specific is like giving them as much knowledge about how to take care of themselves. So be it nutrition, cooking skills, different life skills. So classes on communication, classes on like finances, maybe classes on like how to write a resume. We often think like when we look, some of these things are taught in school, but a lot of times if we're looking at athletes, they're not prioritizing these things. So finding ways to build them into the team structure or the organizational structure and get them in front of these things can be beneficial. They may not see the value in the moment, but if they have that exposure, that when they go into retirement, they do have that little bit of information to fall back on. So that is beneficial. Also mental skills training. So many programs, and it blows my mind, don't have access to mental health professionals, mental skills trainers, or any of those things. And all of the research shows that if we can provide athletes with access to these, their performance is going to improve. Further, it's going to help them to be better human beings. And at the end of the day, we are creating humans, right? We need to remember that our athletes are people. They have lives, they will have lives beyond sport, and we need to be able to set them up for that. So providing sessions that help athletes build their self-awareness, learn about emotional regulation, learning breathing techniques, even better learning somatic work, so that they are able to check in with themselves, they can check in with their body, and they're able to navigate the emotions of being an athlete and the challenges that come with that. And then when they go into retirement, they're going to be able to manage the difficult emotions that come up with the end of that career. And I'll touch on those difficult emotions a little bit later, but there is a lot that comes up in retirement. There's not only the loss of identity, there's loss of community, there's loss of really a support system. So I'll talk through that later. Other things that coaches can do is actually give time off in season and time off out of season. So that might be time off for athletes to be together, to go do something. That might be time off to spend time with family, time off just to rest. But scheduling that time in and allowing, or at times forcing the athletes to take that, is going to, again, allow them to hopefully expand that identity a little bit and give them time away. That really rigid schedule that forces them to be hyper focused on being an athlete is going to really narrow things for them. And there might be discomfort in that time off. So learning throughout their career to embrace that time off is important, because when they transition out, there is going to be a lot of time off. And if we don't know how to be comfortable in downtime, it can be really challenging. And then this, I hope that we're moving here, but making sure that we're treating our athletes as people first, building relationships with players, getting to know them as people first, not just as athletes. So then when they are in struggle or when there's challenges coming up, we can better accurately assess where they are at, and we can help them meet their own needs. And that's the biggest thing, is like, I love that Georgette Reed said this yesterday. We're, as coaches, we're there to support. We are there as support. We want them to be able to manage themselves. And if we create that support system, the athlete will be able to manage themselves, which is better for their performance and better for their life beyond sport. So we're going to talk a little bit about the emotions. So it is really common that professional sporting careers end with little to no planning. As much as we'd love athletes to be prepping and thinking ahead, again, they are so focused on what's going on in the moment. And part of that is because they're driven to perform, they want to be their best, and they really want to, impress those around them. And it's really hard when your restrictive schedule requires you to be focused on that all the time, to be thinking about the future. So it's very common that there's going to be little to no planning. As a result, it is common and very normal for athletes to experience feelings of lower self-esteem and confidence, anger, anxiety, and possibly depression as they move into retirement. These feelings are actually made worse if they have unmet athletic goals that impact their sense of accomplishment as an athlete. So as athletes go into transition, there's going to be a lot of discomfort. There's going to be a lot of big emotions that the athlete may not be comfortable with, because a lot of them are emotions that as a society we don't deem as being appropriate. So the more that athletes can gain skills while they're playing, even if they don't recognize the value of them at the moment, you were planting seeds so that transition is easier. And there is work that's going to need to be done if they do have unmet goals in terms of reframing those goals. Now, if we do get the athlete that is actually thinking about and preparing, there are some things that they can do to help themselves. There's a lot of research looking at collegiate athletes that knew their career was going to end. So depending on where they were playing, whether it was 4 years in the US or 5 years in Canada, if they knew that their career was going to end and they were planning for that end, those athletes that were able to diversify their activities in that final year had a much easier transition. And what was shocking was their performance as an athlete actually improved. So as they diversified their activities, they were able to, one, expand that identity, but they were also able to kind of almost set themselves at ease in their performance, because they put less weight on being almost like perfect and so narrowed in on that focus that their performance actually improved. So finding ways to diversify is really important. And that comes back to this idea of play, of finding other sports, finding other hobbies. Sports are really beneficial because one of the big factors that athletes do notice when they come out is that lack of motivation to actually work out, because that extrinsic motivation of performing is gone. Physical activity, just for the sake of physical activity, can be a very foreign concept. So they may not have that intrinsic motivation to actually work out, and it can take time to develop that. So learning other sports or playing other sports, be it intramural or beer league or whatever it is, that can help expand the identity, and it helps with the physical and social outlet. Generally, it'll give them an opportunity to build a social network, which is really important. But it gives them something physical, which is not only has mental and physical benefits. So building a social network is also very important. When athletes transition, there comes this thing of like, I was a part of a team, I was part of a group, I was part of an organization, and now I'm not. Talking to one NHLer, I said, what happened when you retired? And he said, the phone just stopped ringing. And you go from being a part of the group to no longer being a part of the group. And it's not that group doesn't value you, or you're not important to them anymore. It's just that they are moving forward in one trajectory and you're moving in another. And because you've moved into retirement, it's hard to keep that connection to that group. So it is important for athletes, if they can, and if they know they're going to retire, is to start to expand that social network. Find other people, find people away from sport, or find alumni that they can connect with, because that's going to be a huge help as they come out, because it's not going to be a complete loss of their social network. The other factor is, like, if athletes have a schedule that allows for it, finding work or doing volunteer work. This helps, again, expand that social network, but it also helps give a little bit of purpose. It gives them something beyond their sport or beyond their athletic identity that they can really kind of invest in, they can build as a foundation, and feel good about themselves. So finding something that helps expand. So working, volunteering, whatever it is, that's going to help expand and give a little bit of a foundation or purpose as they move beyond their sport. So now, for those athletes, whether they've prepared or not, there's a number of factors that can help them navigate that retirement. And though those that prepare do tend to go into retirement easier, they have a more successful retirement based on the research, retirement's going to be hard regardless, because it is such a change in life. Unlike, the traditional retirement at the end of one's career, at the end of one's life, where you've worked your whole life into this, and now you're going into that period of retirement of rest and relaxation and exploration. Athletic retirement comes in often, and it's still in the age of adolescence or in those early adulthood years, and you have a whole life ahead of you. So it's like, I've dedicated myself to one identity, and then now I need to do a complete 180 and figure out who I am. So regardless of preparation, that retirement is likely going to be hard. So things that athletes can do, or things we can encourage athletes to do, is find a mentor. Most athletes, when they come out, they rely on family, other friends, or significant others to support them, which is great, but those people are also going through their own transition, especially family and significant others. It's talking to, again, NHLers, they look at the divorce rate amongst newly retired athletes, and that's because there's such a drastic shift in lifestyle. They go from not being home to being home all the time, and that can cause tension within those relationships. And those partners or family are also going through identity shifts. They're losing the opportunity to watch. They're losing, that identity of being the wife of, being the parent of. So they also have their struggles. And the challenge is they can't actually fully validate what the athlete is going through, because they haven't done it themselves. So having an alumni mentor, or having another mentor who has been through that transition to retirement themselves, is really beneficial, because they can help normalize that experience and validate what the athlete is feeling. Other things that can help is doing a skills inventory, getting really clear on what skills the athlete themselves possess. Athletes, they are some of the most well-rounded, skilled people. You talk to anybody who has hired athletes, they possess so many strong skills that are useful in the workforce. Helping athletes identify those skills and learn to leverage those skills is incredibly beneficial. So on my website, I actually have a bunch of different worksheets that athletes can go through, and it helps them start to go and figure out what their skills are. You talk to most athletes, they're probably really good communicators, they're problem solvers, they're resilient, and they think really quickly on their feet, because that's what sport is. It's quick understanding. So if they can learn to really understand and embrace and leverage those, that can be really beneficial, especially as they start to look at new careers and new opportunities for themselves. Building self-awareness, again, this comes back to those mental skills. There's going to be big emotions that come out in retirement. So the more awareness the athlete can build around those emotions, learning to create space for those emotions, learning when they need to ask for help, or learning when they need to utilize other other tools, be it, do I need to exercise? Do I need to work on my breath skills? Do I need to journal? So the more that an athlete can build those skills and that awareness, they're going to better be able to navigate the challenging emotions, and hopefully avoid that dip into depression. Because that dip in depression is likely an inability, as long as it's not chemical, it comes from that avoidance of the emotions, or not actually creating space for those emotions. Other things, so getting really clear on values, and what, and their why, or what their foundation is, and what they want to bring forward into this next stage of their life. So values work is really, really good. It's grounding work. They can be guideposts as you move forward. And the same with, like, what is my why? What is that purpose? What is driving me? What drove me as an athlete? And what can I take from that? How can I take that forward into that next part of my life? I have a talk on this. Brene Brown's work on this is fantastic. But yeah, getting really clear on that. Simon Sinek's work, also very good. His book, Start With Why. Goal setting, this again comes back to those values, and that skills inventory is going like, hey, where do I want to go next? Goal setting, some people really struggle with goal setting, but it provides, again, a framework, provides steps of where do I want to go? Who do I want to be? Who is this person I want to be in the next part of my life? James Clear's work is on atomic habits is really beneficial on this. And just, again, I have worksheets, and there's so many worksheets on goal setting and how to figure out where you want to go. And then again, that support. So building that support network, finding ways to build a social network. Was on a call, the NHLers were laughing about their wives setting up play dates for them, because they found that they were retired and they weren't out socializing, because again, they had lost that network. So finding that network, finding ways to build that network is really, really important. I have one more quote here, and I think it's one that I think is important to highlight. When my career ended, I walked into the rink as a hockey player, and I walked out no longer as a hockey player, and I spiraled into that depression. And when I went into counseling, the counselor very quickly identified what I was experiencing as grief. And I was grieving the loss of my identity. I was grieving the loss of my career. I was grieving the loss of my network. And so this is another quote from an article I wrote. It says, as an athlete, it is likely that your relationship to sport was one of love for the competition, for the physical sensation, the community and social connection, love for the lifestyle, the financial stability, for the fame. Grief is a healthy and normal response to loss of love. Athletes are going to feel a lot of grief as they go into their retirement. And the more we can normalize that, the more we can make them understand that grief is not bad. Grief is just love with nowhere to go. We're going to help make it easier to navigate that transition. So the more we can navigate, it is going to be hard. But there's so many athletes that have been through it. They want to support you. And hopefully the people around you are there to support you. Thank you for listening. I see a couple of questions, so I am going to open up that Q&A. Okay. Yes. So the question is about how do you manage the kids that just don't rest? And this is the challenging one. And I think it comes back to, we need to front load the value of that rest. We live in a society of scarcity. Scarcity is so prominent. This idea that there's never enough, that we're all competing. And when we can get people to understand that rest is a part of the process, when we rest, we're actually eating ourselves, we're making ourselves better. That's going to be a huge part of it. So I think it starts with education around the value of rest, and letting them know that going 100% all the time isn't always the right answer. We do need to rest. but yeah, that is a challenge, and it's one where we see pressure from society, we see pressure from family. And I think it unfortunately is the way that our society is right now. So we have some work to do there. But thank you. Okay, I think we are good. So thank you all for joining. We have a couple more talks today, so I hope you will join us for the remainder.